Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of GLC's interview series. I am Syed Jawad Kader, and this is being brought to you by GLC Ontario. Global Lawyers of Canada, a little bit about it perhaps would be in order. It is the largest association of internationally trained lawyers in Canada. It is also an amalgamation of globally minded lawyers and law students in Canada and who are seeking to requalify. And this is what this talk will be about. We will be focusing on the journey of internationally trained lawyers who have migrated from another jurisdiction and has brought with them a wealth of their experience gained from their home jurisdiction. The objective of the interview series is to reach out to established members of the internationally trained legal community and other persons of interest, and to focus on their journey and to showcase our community as a whole, and to basically bring out the best of us and showcase them to you. So without much further ado, I am going to say that I'm very happy to be joined here by Lara Merjane. She's an internationally trained transactional lawyer, originally from Brazil. She came to Canada a couple of years ago and brought with her about 10 years of transactional experience, transaction and litigation experience from Brazil. And she has since overcome some great, but sadly typical hurdles to establish herself in the legal profession. She is currently a corporate and securities lawyer at Baker & McKenzie. Before this, she worked as a corporate lawyer at another Toronto law firm. And what I found very interesting about her profile was that she speaks 4 languages: English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. Welcome to the conversation, Lara.
Thank you. Those are very nice words. Thank you so much. I hope I can live up to all that.
We are very glad to have you here, and I'm sure that we all have a lot to learn from this talk. Just a little more about you as a context. You came here and took a little bit of an unconventional career trajectory to reaching where you are. And I think that there is a lot to be learned from the career path that you took. So would you kindly sort of briefly walk us through when you came to Canada and what things out of the ordinary did you do to be where you are?
Okay, so I think most of what I've done is a bit untraditional, because the recruitment process in Canada for law firms is very traditional, and it's not intuitive for us, for someone coming from another country. So what I've done, I worked in Brazil mainly in labor employment litigation for 7 years there. And I did have some relevant big tech and banks experience that I could thankfully include in my resume. But I think in the beginning we kind of struggle with adapting that experience in a way that will fit in a position that is not for a lawyer, to translate that experience in a way that's not for a lawyer. So I tried to find a position in labor and employment as an assistant or as a clerk, and I couldn't, probably because I was not translating it well in a way that would make sense for a law firm to hire me as an assistant. But I could find as a contracts administrator. So I've worked in many different big techs, not big techs, in many different legal departments of companies here as a temporary contract administrator during that time that I was in school.
And so when was this? When was this? Which year was this in? Was it pre-COVID or was it during COVID?
It was pre-COVID.
Okay.
So my art claim and everything from school I finished pre-COVID. So it was from 2017 to 2020. So I started school end of 2017, did finish all my courses in person, and did my art claim in the same company that I was working at the time as a contract administrator. And then when COVID hit, it was after I had finished my exams. I think I've had the last exam that was in person.
Oh wow!
For the bar exams.
So was it, you did bring in about 10 years of experience as a lawyer in Brazil. So when you're talking about education and the course that you took here, are you talking about any specific course that you took in Canada?
Yeah, I finished the LLM at Osgood. For someone coming from a civil law jurisdiction, you have to take at least 4 courses in a Canadian university. There are 8 courses that you have 8 requirements that you have to complete, and at least 4 would have to be in a Canadian university. So I found it was easier to just do everything in an LLM.
Right.
So that's what I've done. And as a condition to get into the LLM, I had to finish 2 other courses that Osgood had as a requirement for.
And this is a requirement for everyone coming from civil law jurisdictions.
The 8 competencies that you have to prove. So you could challenge the exams after you take 4 of the courses in a Canadian university. You can challenge the exams, but if you're paying for 4 single courses, it just makes more sense to pay for the full LLM and have a title.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you said that while you were doing the courses, you were also working as a contract administrator at an in-house legal department.
Yeah.
And how long did you have to work there to sort of approach the issue of articling?
So I was there for, all of these positions were temporary, but the last one was a 1.5 years. So it was not bad. Like it didn't feel temporary. So I was there for about 7 months, I think, when I started my articling.
Okay.
But I didn't
go on.
Do the full articling. I asked for an abridgment due to prior experience, and the Law Society allowed me to do 3 months. So
right.
It wasn't...
Okay, so on the issue of articling abridgment, this is something that I wanted to sort of spend a little bit of time on. I remember that you posted on LinkedIn where you're quite prolific in your writings. I must add, everyone who's watching should check out Lara's LinkedIn profile and see have a look out for tips and tricks. So I think you wrote down there something about the abridgment process and why you think that is not the recommended pathway. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your experience was like?
I think it all depends on how you tell your story, obviously, and the people you know. And there's a lot of a lucky factor that you have to consider. That, like for me, for example, I was lucky that I didn't follow the traditional summer articling associate path that people would have to follow to get the best positions in big firms or in the government. And I ended up still being able to get a good position, but it's a completely, like we said, unusual path. But if you don't take the steps to summer in a law firm and then be hired, sorry, my microphone is a bit loose.
That's fine, we can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. So when I say it's traditional, it's because the firms expect that you will summer there. And from summer, they will hire you back as an articling student. And from that pool of articling students, they're going to hire you as an associate. So if you don't follow that path, the chances of you getting into one of these firms is small. It's not the traditional way of doing it is through this path. So if you don't do that, you're kind of playing with your luck. You can. It's not like you're never going to get in. There are many firms that hire that way, but there are many that will not.
Right, especially the bigger firms.
Yes.
Okay. And about the abridgment process, actually, before talking about that, I want to retrace back a little bit about getting the articling process getting the articling opportunity in the first place. I believe that you had to make an application and you had to convince the employers about your qualifications and your requirements, which were gained in Brazil. So how did you sort of draw a comparison with your Brazilian qualifications and the Canadian qualifications? It is something that a lot of internationally trained lawyers fail to sort of, or struggle to do, because they don't know how to sort of translate their qualifications into the Canadian terms. How did you do that?
So I think that's the main challenge that I review a bunch of resumes. People just ask me for tips and I say, can I review your resume? Because usually the problem is there, like you're not being even looked at. Like your resume is, it's just going to, I don't know another word, but like just to the garbage bin and the recruiter's computer, because it's just not in a format that will attract their attention. But not because you're not qualified, but because they don't know how to read your qualification in a way that makes sense here. Especially if you come from a jurisdiction like I've come from, that is civil law or something that is very different than what they want to read here. You have to do a lot of due diligence and research and talk to people to know what's relevant to put in your resume. Because otherwise you're filling a bunch of pages with a bunch of words that will not get you hired. And what I think I've done is, because I was lucky to work in the field, which is not something that people should do actually, because that's unusual. Students here will not usually work during school, but for me, it was fortunate that I worked in legal departments before and I could see what was relevant in the work. Because without knowing what is relevant in the work, how do you write it in your resume in a way that is attractive, right? Like, for example, I worked in contracts and I wanted to get a position after I graduated as a corporate lawyer. So I had to input there what kind of contracts and in what industry, and things like that would be relevant, instead of just saying more generic things like just I worked with contracts. Sometimes
Right.
it's not as attractive as saying I worked with this kind of contract in this kind of industry, and that's exactly what they're looking for.
Right. So I suppose that, just to sort of summarize it so that I'm in the same page as you, what you did was that you identified the industry area of the employer that you're applying for, and then you said that within that industry area, you have done such and such contracts and so many contracts, and these are your achievements within that industry area. Is that correct?
Correct. And if you can put numbers, that's helpful too, because it shows the amount of experience you have. Because one thing is if you had one contract of that kind that you reviewed, and another thing is if you reviewed one contract a day of that, of what they need. So it's quantifying is important.
Sure.
So that I'm saying for finding a job after you articled, like an actual job, because for articling, all of that is not as relevant, I believe, because they are there to train you in what they want from you. So
Right.
it's a different process for articling.
Absolutely. Okay, that's very helpful. I think we all learned a little bit about that from this talk. About the articling abridgment process, coming back to that again, when you did your abridgment and then you completed the abridged articling experience, did you have to explain why you abridged it, and whether how were the employers receptive of this?
I didn't, nobody asked me actually, because I think it's kind of implied that you had that prior experience. And if the law society told them that you only needed those 3 months, I don't think they're gonna go against the law society and say, oh no, I should have more. I don't think that was ever an issue. Nobody have asked me about that specifically, but it is something, anything that stands out from the traditional is something that you should kind of be worried about. Like, don't try to get into any shortcuts in this process, because they are expecting to see you do this kind of studies and then summer and then article and then come into as an associate. That's what they're expecting to see. So if you do something different than that, that's a red flag that you don't have to have. Like,
Right.
don't try to take the shortcuts like I've done, and then ended up going well for me, because I don't know, I guess I was fortunate, but it could go not as good, right?
Sure, absolutely. But this actually brings me to a tricky subject because there are many people who are coming over, such as yourself, who came over from another jurisdiction with experience, and their pathway to requalification is actually different from someone who has qualified locally.
Yes.
And I would imagine that their resume would also look very different to
Yes.
anybody who's sort of seeing this. So there is going to be some degree of divergence that is inevitable.
Yes.
So I think is the point, are you trying to make the point that, like try to keep the divergence to a minimum as much as possible?
Exactly. Because there are things that we can control. And as you can only control certain things. So if you can control the fact that you will take the most traditional path, I mean, I'm not saying people should be tamed and only do this thing because that's the only thing that works. I'm saying that the most traditional path is the one that works the most.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I'm expressing it well, but that's what I mean. It's like you're coming into a different culture that you have to adapt to. So in my culture, for example, if I worked as a legal assistant or as a clerk, that would show to the employer that I had interest in knowing more about the market or in getting inside the law practice in a certain way before, and I'd be seen as someone who is a bit more advanced in that in knowing that market than someone that didn't have that experience, that was just studying. And for here, that doesn't work because they expect that the training will come in that summer and articling path.
Okay. So it's basically the mode of gaining the experience that differs.
Exactly.
Okay.
But
So
I'm not saying to people like, don't do what you feel like doing. I'm just saying that the most traditional way is what they're expecting to see. So if you go against that, you're going to have to explain yourself. And then in an interview, that is uncomfortable.
Absolutely. I think that is the point very well made. What would you say to those who have come from abroad with experience from abroad that is sufficient to gain them a
Yes.
complete exemption from the articling process? So that person doesn't even need to do articling, or that person, and the LSO certifies this process. So you were mentioning a little while ago that when the LSO certifies a person as being competent and chooses to license that person, are the employers going to be just satisfied with that, or do they ask any further questions?
They didn't ask me, but as I'm saying, it all depends on where do you want to work? Because if you want to work in a place where things are going to be less traditional, that is not going to matter at all. I was very fortunate to find people like that didn't care about that. They just wanted to have a good employee. And I think that a lot of the firms are missing really good people because they're going through this very traditional path. So people, they can do whatever they feel is good for their career, and they will end up getting to a good place after. They just have to be careful in how they plan. If they want, for example, to work at the government, it would be impossible, I think, like, I don't know, for what I hear from people who article there, to get in as a lawyer after without having article there before. So it all depends on what career path do you want. You have to do what it takes to be in that career that you want.
Okay, that's very interesting. I mentioned a little while ago that you speak 4 languages. Was that something that helped you in being where you are now?
Not really, to be honest. I wish. I don't speak fluently all of them. Some are just working proficiency, like I can read and I can understand what they're saying, but I don't speak fluent French, and I can understand most of Spanish and speak some.
Right.
Yeah,
But
but not really. I think everything that I've worked with was mainly English.
Right. And if there is somebody who is absolutely fully proficient in a particular language, do you think that that would stand out, that would help them stand out to a potential employer?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like everything that you have in your past experience, as sometimes even as a volunteer or as a leader in your family, if you know how to write your story, that is going to be very relevant. And depends too on where you're applying. Because if you're applying in for a small firm that doesn't have any clients in that language that you want to work, then it's a different story than it is a very niche practice of a lawyer that is already working that language, for example. So it all
Sure.
depends on your plans for your career, but it's for sure something that you can explore as an advantage.
I guess it depends on what sort of customer base that client is catered into, and also the
Exactly.
sort of work that they're doing. Like, for example, I was looking at some arbitration firms, the firms that are engaged in international arbitration, and some of them are engaged with arbitration work from a particular region of the world, and there is a certain language that is spoken in that region of the world. For those firms, having skills in that language is a very big asset.
Mhm.
But this is going to vary from firm to firm, and it really does depend on the dynamics of their work and what sort of language they're working with.
Exactly. Yeah. So it all comes to how you want to design your path. And same goes for the articling exemption. So if you want to work in a place that you can explore that, then that's awesome and you should. But depending on where you want to work, then you have to kind of go with the flow.
Sure, sure, absolutely. um, you also mentioned something in your LinkedIn post about firms not hiring first-year associates. That is something that I thought that you would be able to add to in the discussion, because a lot of internationally trained lawyers think that once they are licensed, they would be able to find a position because they are legally qualified to practice law in Ontario. Why is this different, and how is this different, and how difficult is this sort of barrier? And is there a way to recover yourself from it?
Well, I did because I had that mistake in my career. I had no idea because, as I said, all of this process is not intuitive, and I wish someone had been as blunt, as honest as I'm being here to me when I started. Because if I knew all this, I would not, for example, leave the job that I was. Yeah, I was in the legal department and a temporary position as a contracts administrator. I finished my articles there and just continue as a contracts administrator. They did not have a need for a lawyer. They already had a general counsel. It wasn't a big department. And then when I left and I started looking for a position, was when I found out that people don't hire first years because of that traditional summer articling associate path. Because whoever they hired as a first year associate was an articling student there in most places.
Right.
So for you to find a place that will hire first year, they have to have lost an articling student, which is something that usually doesn't happen because nobody else is hiring that articling student. And it is really something that you have to explain in your interview when you're interviewing, because you're applying for positions that are for someone who has at least 1 to 3 years of experience, because nobody's hiring that 0 year, that
Right.
no experience year. And you will have to explain why you're applying, which for someone that already has experience before, you can explore that. Right. I had experience here, for example, in legal departments, not as a lawyer, but I was elaborating contracts, drafting contracts, negotiating contracts. So that was some kind of some level of experience that could kind of qualify as an experience that a first year would have. So I could explore that. But if you don't have that, then you're in a limbo. You don't have anyone hiring, which during this last few months, there is a shortage of lawyers. I don't know what's going on, but there's been a shortage of lawyers, and I've been seeing first years being hired, which is something that is very unusual for the market. It's not market. It's something that's happening this last few months, but that's not the usual market.
Right. I've heard that, in the summer of this video is being recorded in the summer of 2021. And I've heard across the term of the great resignation, the great wave of resignation or something like that. So a lot of the lawyers, a lot of the law firms are hiring more, and associates are moving from firm to another firm. And some of them are actually even finding opportunities abroad, outside Canadian borders as well. So it's a good time to put yourself out in the market. And then, for internationally trained lawyers who have, let's say, 5 years of experience or 10 years of experience from abroad, or even 3 years of experience from abroad, if they've just been licensed and they want to apply for a job that requires a minimum of 2 years or 3 years of experience, would they be able to compensate for the experience that they don't have in Canada with the experience that they do have outside?
I think certainly there is a way of exploring that. It all depends on the compatibility of what you're applying for and what you worked before. I think some employers would be open to, and I was lucky to find someone that was open to my prior experience. It's just, you have to be very careful on what you promise in your resume, because we're juniors here. We come with all this 10 years prior experience, but when you start working, there are things that you don't know at all. So you have to be careful when you promise that you have this experience, this prior experience, and then you get there to do the job and they ask you to do some basic stuff and you're like, no, I don't know how to do this. So it's something that it's a fine line that you have to you can and you should certainly explore your prior experience. That is an advantage that you have, and something that you should for sure use in the recruitment process. But there's also this side that you have to be careful on how you put it to your future employer, to not overpromise. So a way of doing that is just letting them know right away in the interview, which is risky.
Right, exactly. But then again, it's always better to under promise and over deliver than the other way around.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge here is also to get called to an interview in the first place, because a lot of the times we apply and because the system is managed by an AI-based software, it recognizes certain parameters which are attuned to the Canadian way of recruitment. And that is just not there for internationally trained lawyers. So their resumes get shelved.
Yes.
Is there a way to beat the system?
I think the best approach here would be to pressure employers to not be discriminating us. That would be the best approach. But there is certainly a way of putting things in your resume. I think people fail to read job descriptions a lot. Like, they apply with the same resume to many job descriptions that will not make sense sometimes. Like, it's not what they're looking for. Sometimes you may have that experience, but you're not showing it in your resume in the same keywords or in a way that will attract that specific position. So when you're applying, I think it's more valuable to apply to fewer positions where you have this care of adapting your resume to that specific position, especially if you have a lot of experience. Instead of putting all of your experience, you can just tailor your resume to say what it needs to be said, what should really be there, that to attract that specific recruiter. So you could have many different resumes. That is something that a partner told me once when I used to reach out to a lot of lawyers to talk to them for tips, because I was in the dark completely. I did not know how to be hired. And I knew that I I had the capacity, I had the ability, I had the skills, but I didn't know how to translate that, which is what we usually struggle with. And one of the partners that I talked to, he said, you have a lot in your resume. Nobody's going to read all that. So tailor your resume to say the exact keywords that you would not be lying, but you'd be using, tailoring your experience to that job post without overpromising, without lying. You're going to just say those words that they're looking for within your experience.
Sure, and the words that they're looking for is often contained within the job description itself.
Yeah. The job descriptions sometimes are very descriptive of the kind of person they're looking for.
Absolutely. I think they really, like many job descriptions, but certainly in larger firms, are very detailed. Yeah. And you can really get a sense of what sort of a person they're looking for. And if you sort of, I think the key takeaway from this point that you just made, which is a very important point, that, just don't send out boilerplate resumes and hope to get called from a significant portion of them. It's better to do your research, look into the sort of people, and really ask yourself why you want to apply to that firm. Because in the process of asking yourself that question, I think you will also be answering questions that you might be asked later down in the recruitment process. So I think it's very, very important that, Lara, you mentioned the tailoring the resume and the cover letter to each job description can really significantly boost your chances of getting an interview.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
And once you have, I think in this process, it's also important to know that, a lot of the lawyers who I come across, internationally trained lawyers who are looking to requalify here, they don't come across as having like enough faith in their experience gained from the other jurisdiction. And I think it's one of the things that you have sort of not directly but indirectly conveyed, is that you had faith in the experience that you gained. And It is that confidence that allowed you to answer the minute, the subtle questions about what part of that experience suited the experience that is being looked out for. Would you agree with that?
Totally, yeah. I think confidence is a trait that every lawyer should have. Even sometimes when you're not very confident, you have to find a way of bringing that out of you, especially if you're a litigator. But I think what helps a lot is you knowing your story very well, like knowing exactly what you've done, put it on paper, know what your strengths are, and really write it down and refer to it every time that you have to, anytime before an interview or anytime that you're doubting that you're actually good in what you're doing. Because there are some, I was actually talking about this with a colleague that is going through art clean, and we were talking about this yesterday. And there are things that you as a professional for so long, there are traits that as a professional for so long, you have that other students that just joined, they're just starting working right now, they will not have. And that's not necessarily knowledge of substantial law. That will come with time. And we can't, as I said in the beginning, we can't speed up that process. There are no shortcuts for that. But for dealing with people, for being articulate, for having this confidence and this courage to explore things that are uncomfortable, because our profession is basically just being uncomfortable all the time. So being comfortable with this uncomfortableness, that is something that many others won't have in their first year, and that you will as someone that was previously a professional.
I think that's the catchphrase of the morning for me, being comfortable with this uncomfortableness. It will
That's
definitely
gonna be forever, right?
Absolutely. I think that is very important because, like you are moving into a new jurisdiction, it's a different culture, and then the very nature of the work that you do is sometimes contentious. And it is not the most relaxed of places to be to be having your professional career, but to be comfortable in that setting, I think that that gives a general sort of grounding that you need to secure your positions and get ahead.
Yeah,
I think it's very important. I want to also talk about like the sort of time that you spend, what it looks like being a transactional lawyer in Canada. You've done, I was looking over your LinkedIn, you've done 3,000 contracts in one of your roles, and that boggles my mind, and how does it actually get very contentious? If so, how regular is it? What sort of differences and nuances did you face in drafting and looking at contracts here as opposed to looking at contracts in Brazil? And while you are discussing this, can I also ask you to sort of comment on the difference in the legal culture that you faced?
well, that's gonna take hours for me to talk about the differences.
Sure, we have time.
Joking.
We have time.
Just joking. What was the first question? Sorry.
The first question was that, like what sort of differences in contract, firstly, what does your workday look like as a transactional lawyer? How does it, does it get very testy or aggressive? And how does it tally? How does it differ from your transactional experience in Brazil?
So not at all, not confrontational. Maybe for someone who hasn't worked in litigation before, they would think that some of it can be confrontational, but I think as litigators, we have a different threshold for what's
we've seen it all. We've seen it all.
It is a different, certainly a different threshold for confrontation. When you're used for a decade, you've been in in confrontational situations, your threshold for the stress of that kind of setting is different. So my experience has been that transactional is paradise in Canada, because people are so polite. You really are not in a country where people will just come at you or come against you for anything. People are really collaborative in the setting of on a transactional practice. Internally and externally, they all want the deal to happen, and to happen in the most nice way possible as Canadians, right? We do. I've been seeing in this firm a lot of international back and forth and transactions with other lawyers, because the firm is known exactly for its international practice. I see that is across the borders. It's not just in Canada, but I think in Canada is a bit more, it's a bit more polite than other countries, I'd say, than what I always use back home, for sure.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, like, Canadians are known to the outside world as being so nice.
Yeah,
and
it's been paradise to work. After you work in litigation in Latin America, this is like, there's no stress in corporate right now that would be comparable. Even if you work many hours that day, even if there is a little bit of a stress that day, it's not comparable to what litigation was.
Right. And like, when you're negotiating contracts, you're sending contracts back and forth with red lines, and like, you get to a point in a negotiation in some deals where things are about to break. How do you handle situations like that, if at all? Do you encounter such situations here?
Well, we do have deals that don't happen, that you get to a point where the parties can't agree. I think I'm too junior, honestly, to give a good answer to that question. My apologies. But I think it's handled. I've never been in a situation really where the deal didn't happen because of confrontational conversations or confrontational anything. But it for sure happens. I've heard of it. And then it goes to, I guess, if it goes to litigation, it gets out of our hands. So we don't know how it goes after that, which is something totally different, right? I don't know if in your country is the same, but in Brazil, we do both. We do transactional and litigation. So
Sure.
it's a bit different than back home.
Sure. And then if I can just ask you to comment on, what the difference in the legal cultures is between Brazil and here, and if there is any specific example that comes to mind at this point. I mean, like, no pressure, but if there is something, then I'm sure that we'd all love to know.
Yeah, it's hard to say because I've been in at home since I started practicing as a lawyer. So I think there's a lot more mentorship here. Like in Brazil, you pass the bar, you are supposed to know everything. Like people expect you, they expect your family, especially, they're going to come to you and ask a question of a very complex question that you should know because you passed the bar exam. And here, I think that is not expected from junior lawyers. There is this structure, which I love that exists because it makes us grow in a very structured way that I like to see. I like to see that. I don't know if you're the same, but like I like to every moment of my career know that I'm a step above than I was a few months ago. And that certainly puts us in a position where that perspective is easier to visualize. And back home, that wasn't something that I could see. Like I was always doing things that were both senior and junior, senior and junior.
Sure, absolutely. I think you make a great point here. And mentorship here, the structure for mentorship is totally very different from many other jurisdictions, and it's so robust. And I think this also ties in with the very Canadian trait of being nice and friendly, because if you can approach somebody in a nice way, in a professional way, then provided they have time, they will respond to you, and you will be able to have a conversation with them, and even like have a virtual coffee or even an in-person coffee with them at times. When you sought your mentorship, both in firm, in your role, as well as outside it, was there any specific point that you would recommend internationally trained lawyers to focus on to find mentorship?
To find mentorship, or
to find mentorship. So for example, if there is somebody who's absolutely here and doesn't know anybody, or doesn't know many people within a particular subject area, in the firm, I think it's a little more structured. You can always consult with your supervisor. You can tell me a little more about that. But outside the firm, where do you look? Like, who do you approach?
So there are many internationally trained lawyers associations and communities. This one is one of them, right? We have a mentorship program. Those are more structured programs that I also recommend. But there's always LinkedIn that you can go and just reach out to a person and say, hey, I see you're an internationally trained lawyer. I'd love to speak with you. I've never had someone say, no, I can't talk to you. So I talked to dozens of people because I was very lost when I first got here. Right now, I think we have all these great associations putting out information there. But when I started in 2017, there wasn't much happening in that environment. So it was something I just reach out to people, and everyone was super nice. Everyone just said, yeah, let's go for a coffee or a dinner, and they gave me their notes, or sometimes they gave me because we need notes for school. Those who didn't start yet will know soon that we need notes. Yeah, so it's just a combination of everyone had different experiences, and everyone that we talk to have different things that you put in that puzzle of what works for you. Because what worked for one person may not work for you, but at least they tell you in the bigger picture, this worked for me this way and why. And they already passed through that challenge. They know how you're feeling. Sometimes it's good to have that person there telling you that it passed.
Sure. That's absolutely awesome. I think like going to having to meet somebody and getting advice from somebody who's already walked the path that you are seeking to walk is invaluable. And it can be an uncomfortable experience from some coming from certain cultural backgrounds to approach somebody cold turkey over LinkedIn or over other forms of social media. But over in Canada, I think Lara and I can both say that it's very much accepted. It's very much okay to do that. You can send over a message, you can send over a connection request, just include a small message when you are sending over the connection request, and that helps the recipient to contextualize why you're trying to connect with them. And they're very helpful most of the times in answering your questions to the best of their abilities. And I think,
exactly.
I think Lara, on that note, we are coming to the end of our time. I would just ask you a concluding question that I normally ask to all our participants here on this show. Do you think an ITL has a shot at reaching the top of the professional ladder in Canada?
Oh, I'm certain of it. I am very sure of it. I think law firms that don't look at us as people who we're comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're working in a different language. We are putting ourselves through all this process after being professionals for so long. And that is something that they should look at us and see someone who is extremely eager and that will give their best to their careers. So I think absolutely, I think we're going to see more and more of that. I have no doubts.
Thank you so much. I think I echo your sentiments as well. And, with that, this has brought us to the end of the episode. I think our key takeaway, if not anything, is that we should be comfortable with uncomfortableness. And that is part of the that is part of the licensing process. And the sooner we can do it, the further ahead we can get. And with that, Lara, thank you so much for being here on this Sunday morning, beautiful Sunday morning. And I really hope that I really hope that we will be able to talk soon again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for letting me express my thoughts here. I know it's an uncomfortable thought sometimes that we it's not what we want to hear sometimes, but I wish that people had told me all of this before. That's why I'm saying it.
And we all learned a lot from your talk. Thank you.
Thank you.